So what do you do when you have a contractor that does not do what they're supposed to do? We're going to be talking about that today. Welcome to Live for Free, where we're going to talk about, in this particular episode, the things that you can do in a situation such as this and how you can fix it. Just to give you some backdrop, this is one of our largest projects that we are working, excuse my watch, and in this project, we are about to make some major changes in lives of individuals who are coming out of incarceration. And as we got ready for this project, we went into it right. Many of you here as compassionate investors, you may have not done any type of rehab before, but we've been in this world for over a decade, and I still struggle with this, working with contractors. But we went into it right. We established specifically what was to be done. We went over a scope of work. We established everything that we needed to as far as our critical documents to make sure that we all was on board with exactly what needed to be done. Now, going into it, because we clearly said, hey, are you sure you can meet these deliverables? Because you have to make sure as you do this work that you find individuals who can do the work that you ask for them to do. Now, I will say this was a new contractor, so I'll take the fault for that. Someone we had never worked with before, but I saw possibilities, because that's what I do. I see possibilities in people. I went into it giving him a chance to be able to work this project. So when we got into this project, as I said, I made sure that we had all of the contracts in place that we needed to have. We established our milestones, when he was be paid at certain points, and the time just kept stretching. And because I had so many other projects that we were working, I will take some responsibility for why it took so long to get done. But when you get into this work, you have to make sure that as you set those deliverables and those milestones, that you stick with it. So in this particular project, where we defined what the deliverables look like, we already started off on the wrong track, and it was snowballing faster than we thought it should have, to the point where we were 21 weeks behind schedule and ready just to be done. But we had already invested so much time into it that it made it very difficult for us to recover with considering the amount of money that we went into it. So let me explain some of how this works when you are working with a contractor, especially whether it's a new contractor or an old contractor. You really need to go into these the same way. Know exactly what it is that you want to get done. That's why I said we established our scope of work up front. We knew what we wanted to get done. We had him sign off on all the documents that we needed to do, and we went down that path. I know what hurt us was by the time we got started, the timeline was not right. He said he could commit to it. We held him to that, and it just kept snowballing, and money had already been given out. We paid 5 times on this contract to get things done, and every time it was always some excuse or something happened that caused the delay to happen. In this particular case, we had water that we didn't expect to have happen. We had to repair the water and make sure that perforated hoses were around the house. That added time to it. And then we had a delay with the municipality we were working with, because we did have to get a permit. And I think there was a delay in how long it took him to get the permit in place. By the time those things had happened, money had already been given out that we could not effectively cancel that contract and start with somebody new, because some money had already been spent out. So those were the type of things that hit us as we were looking at this project on how we move forward. Now, as a compassionate investor getting into this space, you want to make sure, as I said, that you know exactly what you need to get done. But I'm going to say also, make sure you've got some, I guess you want to call it mitigation funds, in case there are things that show up that you didn't expect. That's what happened in this project. We didn't know that there was going to be a flood in the basement that caused us to have to get the project mitigated and get the water resolved and deal with perforated hoses and making sure that there was no water that was going into the basement. So that was the biggest issue, if I had to say. We kept having setbacks related to getting that repaired. And the best way to know whether those type of things happen is during a flood or during a large rainfall. Didn't know it was there until we had like a massive rainfall that really impacted our basement significantly. So we had to deal with that, and that was not a small amount of money. That's why we put in more money than we were expecting to put into this project to deal with that. So making sure you've got funds set aside to cover things that you might not expect is critical. Another thing that I would say that hurt us in this project is we had only one bid. Now, mind you, when you get into this work and you're doing this, you're getting the 6 documents in place for the person that you selected, get 3 bids. Typically, when you get 3 bids for any amount of work that you're doing, you will always have a high bid and a low bid and a middle bid. I always hit in the middle. I don't go for the lowest person unless I have something to validate to go with the lowest person on a bid. But you always want to go in picking the best way in which you can do that work. So choosing that middle is always the best way to go. You don't want the highest, you don't want the lowest. So the point who's in the middle is pretty much the way you should go on that. So I would say as you are getting into the space and you're dealing with properties that require more than just simply coming in and putting furniture, please make sure you get a good contractor, because that will make or break what you're trying to build. Another thing that you're going to want to make sure that you do is if there are anything that you know you need a permit for, you need to be the person going to get that permit, not the person who is doing the work. And let me tell you why. When you go to get a permit and it's pulled, that person who pulled the permit owns that permit. So as I think about this particular project, when the permit was pulled, which was pulled late, it was pulled with the contractor. And I know better. We have a lot of things going on, so I'll admit my faults in this project, but I know better to make sure that the permit is in our name. Well, by the time we got to that point and money had already been expended on this contract, it was really hard to say, oh, well, go away, goodbye. Why? Because the contract was in his name. And when you have a contractor where it's in their name, they call all the shots. So if you fire somebody and their permit is in their name, you now have to go down there and get a new permit. And there are things that you simply don't know that could come up that could totally derail the situation. Perfect example, and this was not mine, I'm taking this from another investor that I know. He had gone in and had a contractor do some work in the property that required a permit. And it was supposed to be, I guess at that time, 2 permits that he was supposed to get, but he only got 1. And by the time he had to then fire the contractor and then go get another permit, he realized that he did not get the second permit. And that second permit was the most critical one because it was dealing with electrical, and they had done the electrical work without a permit. So now here he is, had fired this guy. He'd already paid all this money to get this work done, and he thought he had a permit, did not have his electrical permit. So by the time he fired that guy, went to go get a new permit, the inspector came and said, is this new work? And he said, yes. That inspector made him pull everything out. And we're not talking about a little. We're talking about some major electrical work and built in the walls, do everything. All of that stuff had to be torn out and redone because it wasn't done with a permit. So you see how pricey that can cost you. So by you going and getting the permit, you automatically know what you need to get. It's in your name. And if you have to fire a contractor, that's the first thing that you'll do, is make sure that you've secured that, and make sure all the work that, like if you had the permit and you have to fire this person, make sure they complete the things that need to be done and that you've done that process fairly. Because if you didn't, and you have to now consider, I might not be able to fire this guy because I got to make sure I get this work done. So those are things you have to think about as you're thinking about hiring individuals to do work in your property. Now, as I look back at this as far as lessons learned, because I have a lot to learn from this particular experience, only because before I get into the lessons learned, let's talk about how we resolved the situation. Because we were already 21 weeks late. He had the permit has not been cleared yet, and he was already behind. Like, we were so significantly behind. There was maybe this much money left that he needed to do. And he still would have gotten it done right if he still finished what he said he was going to do. But he didn't. So this is how we resolve this. And I'll say this too. At the end of the day, you want to make sure as you look at where you are that you know what your end cost is, because that helped me determine what to do next. So by the time we were 21 weeks late, he was already, and we have built into our contracts that every week that you're late, you're going to pay a fee. So by the time he had paid this fee, and after what he was owed a certain amount of money, but he had so many fees, he might have had this much money, like between the two of them, the fees and how much he was supposed to get, there was literally a gap left. And that small gap was still his funds. But at the end of the day, so this is how I resolved it. It's not my issue. He knew that there was a penalty. So I wasn't going to keep bringing that up. But I knew I needed to get the work done, and I knew I needed to get the contract done, or get the permit cleared. So we focused on that permit. We focused on, let's get this permit closed and cleared, because it was in his name. I couldn't really just fire him. I had to start over again. So we made sure that the work was done to get the permit completed, which still left him some money. Didn't leave him what he thought he was going to get, but it left him some money. And then by the time he did that work and then completed it, because that was really all he had left, was the permit and then a little bit of cleaning, and he was done. By the time all of that got done, what I did was I wrote up, because he was in default of this contract. And by the time we got done, and this was, if he had done it in a perfect world, the money he was owed he would have gotten. But he kept stretching it out. He kept stretching it out even further. So we ended up writing a letter basically stating that he understood that he is in default of the contract, and that even though he's owed this much, he has this much in penalties. And by that time, the penalties had grown significantly to the point where he owed us money. That's how bad it got. And I'm not an unfair person. Clearly, I don't want to be unfair to anyone, but that's why you want to make sure you have contracts in place to protect you from things like this, because I see the contractor as a friend first and a contractor second. So that's why I tried him out without doing other bids. So we wrote up the contract, basically the letter stating that he was in default, but that we didn't want to be unfair. What did he feel would be the fair amount for him to receive, even though the money he thought he was going to get, he knew he wasn't going to get. He didn't realize he was that deep in the hole. So being the person that I am, I simply said, what would be the fair amount you feel you deserve to get based on this contract? And I wrote it up so that the line was blank, so he could put in what he felt was fair to settle this arrangement. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure you close things out. Throughout this course of time, we had made sure that all the partial lien waivers were signed every time he received money, what was completed, so that we had legal covering every time that we gave money. This was the last piece. And in this last piece was he didn't get any money. So we wanted to get an agreement. So in that letter where I stated he was in default, he was owed no more money, but let's negotiate and this will resolve the matter. That letter within itself took care of everything that you needed covering what potentially he may have thought he needed or was supposed to get. He understood he wasn't going to get it, and then what we settled on. And we had the final lien waiver that needed to be signed as well. That also forgave anything that was owed to subcontractors as well. So when you do things properly and you resolve breaches, because you can clearly resolve a breach and you really want to resolve it, you do not want it to not get resolved. And I will just tell you, there are going to be times when you won't be able to resolve it. I'm just going to let you know that. So if that is the case, if you're ever in a position where it just simply can't be resolved, just document. Document that you made every attempt to resolve it, that person rejected it, and document that. And that only thing you'd be really concerned about then will be that final amount. If it was owed, if it was deemed as owed, that would be all you'd be dealing with. But you have documentation in place that should protect you if you follow the process properly for protecting yourself. And I think what we'll do in an episode is probably talk specifically about these documents and how you put them together. That way, if you are a compassionate investor that's going to do this type of work, you've thought everything through related to how you're going to deal with that property and the amount of work that you're going to get done. So When there's a breach, you always want to make sure you correct it as quickly as you can. So the lessons that I honestly can say that we have in this one, because we had a lot of lessons, and I guess I'm gonna just tell you, I don't ever not learn. Like every opportunity, I've been doing this for so long. We've been flipping houses, we've dealt with contractors, I've fired contractors. Like you'll never stop doing that work. You're never that great where you won't have a moment where you'll fail, and you're always gonna learn something from it. But my clear lesson in this one here, because I did the right things, I set clear expectations up front. We used the documents. We did everything we were supposed to do right, and we still had a fail. So I would say my lesson in this one is still follow your process, no matter what the situation. In this case, this guy was my friend. He's someone I saw as a friend, an opportunity where we could build more business together. And I forego my process for him when I only took his bid. I should have took 2 or 3 other bids and evaluated, was this good? Was this a good timeline? Because I do this stuff, but I couldn't tell you how long it takes to do all these things. But we thought we had a fair contract. And even with a setback, we should have had all of those things built in. And that would be the second lesson that I would add is make sure that you have enough time that you built in for contracts. If we know something takes 4 weeks, then make the contract for 6 weeks or sooner. But when you do that, you give them more latitude. Now, I could not have given more latitude in this one. It was just fail on top of fail to be 21 weeks late. That's simply unacceptable. So I would say those were my biggest lessons and takeaways from this experience. But the great thing, our property, we were able to go in, and which you'll see some of the pictures here of what we were able to get done in this property. And it does look amazing, but it came with a price. So I would just say make sure as you get into this work, especially with you're dealing with rehabs, that you do and use all the documents properly. So look for that episode of us talking specifically about which documents you should use when you're contracting and the things you need to consider when you're doing properties that change people's lives. So until the next one, I will see you then.